Hello, human biology students. I'm just going to really quickly finish up talking about blood, and then we're going to move into the heart. So I think this is right where I left off last week when I talked about blood. So that plasma, we talked about platelets and plasma. Excuse me, alliteration. Um, so plasma is that liquid component of the blood, and it's really important in maintaining homeostasis, which I know I've mentioned a lot, but it actually is really important. And obviously, blood is a really big part of maintaining homeostasis in the body. So the composition, so your blood can be separated, and they do this actually when they harvest certain parts of your blood. They kind of spin it in a centrifuge. So like if you donate plasma, which when you go to college, a lot of college students do this because larger cities tend to have places that you can go to where you can donate that plasma. So this is that liquid component of the blood, and they do harvest this separately. So they spin it in kind of a centrifuge, and then the heavy parts of the blood sink to the bottom. The plasma is lighter, and it goes to the top, and they just sort of siphon it off, and they harvest that plasma, and the rest of your blood parts actually go. They just put it right back into your body. So composition of plasma, mostly water, but there's a lot of other substances in there that are really important in, again, that homeostasis, like maintaining the correct, it says osmotic load. So like your blood has to have the right amount of solutes in salts and so forth in order for, for your cells and your cell's environment to be isotonic, meaning that water won't go into or come out of unnecessarily. Also for maintaining pH, we said the coagulation, which is clotting factors, and then antibodies. So plasma also has those antibodies in, which can be important in fighting infection, right? And then serum is just the plasma without the antibodies. So sometimes we talk about blood serum. That's most of the plasma, but just without those antibodies. All right. Since you did the POGIL activity on blood typing, I'm actually not I'm not going to go through this. I think the activity did a really nice job of having you look at those surface markers and determining blood type and so on. These visuals look very much like it did on those on that activity that you hopefully have done and turned in. But just a really quick overview, you can see, so type O blood doesn't have any of those surface markers, those antigens. I'm going to move this. This is type A blood, and you can see that, so if this is the shape of the antigen, yeah, it has the, let's say that this, the arrow looking ones are the antigens we find on type A blood. Type B blood then would be a different shape of antigen, right, which identifies it as type B blood, and then AB blood has both of those. And again, I know as you work through that activity, you could see, oh, here, that they make antibodies based on what antigens they don't have, so that they'll recognize, blood that has antigens that your blood doesn't have, you would recognize them as foreign and attack it. Not that there's a big advantage to us in attacking other people's blood if we had to get other people's blood that wasn't the same type, but it's just in our bodies, we have this really great system that is, recognizes self and non-self, and it is super important. It just, unfortunately, it wouldn't necessarily be super important in getting blood from other people that we would attack that, if that makes sense. But you can see why, if I have type O blood, I'm a universal donor. There is one more piece, and I know, so this is just explaining this, which I kind of already did. the other piece of that, so we see these 4 basic blood types, but the other piece of that is there is a Rh factor that determines whether your blood is positive or negative. So I am type O blood, but I am O positive, meaning my blood contains this Rh factor. So technically I'm not a universal donor because I have an extra antibody that comes from this Rh factor. I'm positive for this Rh factor. Both of my children were O negative, so they actually were universal donors because they have no surface antigens on their blood. So universal donor, but not universal recipient, because they do make, if you are type O blood, let's say you're O negative, if we even take this Rh factor out of here. So if you're type O negative, or you're type O blood, then you don't have any antigens on the surface of your red blood cells, but you do make antibodies. You make anti-A and anti-B antibodies. So you would attack, if you were given those bloods, your body would attack those type A blood or type B blood. So if you are type O blood, you can only receive type O. All right, so that was a quick overview of blood. And again, I hope that the activity I had you do last week was super helpful in clearing. I actually love that activity. And I know some of you, if you had college biology with me first semester, I know that you did that, but that was less than half of you, I think. So I thought it was really important to do it in human biology. All right. So you've already hopefully watched the video that I posted from Khan Academy. I really like that one, and I do show that every year. The only part I don't like is he does mention, that something about deoxygenated blood being blue. Do not. Your blood is never blue, okay? Unless you're a horseshoe crab, or I think lobsters might have blue blood. That's kind of the extent of it. Your blood is red. It does get darker when it goes through and is oxygen deprived at that point where the oxygen is used up, and it does get darker. But it's definitely always red. You have iron in your blood, and that's part of what makes it red. That doesn't go away when the oxygen goes away. So you do always have that. You always have that red color. All right, so quick overview of the anatomy of the heart. So your heart is obviously a very muscular organ. It has to be constantly beating and constantly working. So very, very muscular. We say, and we looked at cardiac tissue in the last chapter. And remember, it had those intercalated discs, and it was kind of unique. So we do say it consists mostly of cardiac tissue called the myocardium, surrounded by a sac called the pericardium. It has 2 sides, which we break into 2 main sections, atria and ventricles. So 4 chambers. You have a right atria and a right ventricle, and then a left atria and ventricle as well. Atria and ventricles are separated by valves. We call these semilunar valves and atrioventricular valves. And this is part of what gives you, if you've ever, put your ear on someone's chest, or if you've ever had the opportunity to use a stethoscope and listen to someone's heartbeat, you can hear that sort of lubbed up or whatever sound of the heart. Those are actually the valves opening and closing. The valves are really important in keeping the blood moving in the correct direction and the correct path through the heart. And so we say there are 2 main pathways of blood through the heart. We have the pulmonary circuit. So pulmonary means lungs. Whenever we talk about anything pulmonary, we're talking about the lungs. So this is the right side of the heart. Brings blood from the body to the heart and lungs. It's going to force it through that lung system. And then the systemic circuit is the left side of the heart that brings blood to the entire body to deliver those the nutrients and oxygen and so forth, and all the things that are carried in the blood. I like this visual because, so here I think is part of why people think blood turns blue. So arteries are always for pumping blood away from the heart, and veins are for bringing that deoxygenated blood back to the heart. And a lot of in diagrams, and even I wish you were here doing fetal pig dissections, although some of you probably don't miss it so much. But we usually, I always order pigs that are injected, meaning that they inject this like rubbery kind of substance into the veins and arteries. And I always, so they inject arteries with red substance, and they inject veins with blue substance. So I think that's part of some, and also this diagram represents it the same way. And I think that's where a lot of that misconception comes from, that, yeah, blood turns blue when it's used up all of the oxygen. Well, it doesn't, but in diagrams like this, we color code it, because otherwise this would be really hard to understand this path. So you can see here are the lungs. And maybe this shows you, I don't know if this shows you this again later, but these two, vein, artery, and all these little capillary systems. This is one lung, this is the other lung. This is where that blood does get reoxygenated in the lung system. So they're just kind of showing it. See how it turns color here? It doesn't really turn from blue to red, but it's easy to represent it that way. So from this particular diagram, I just really want you to realize that path of the blood. I will ask you to reiterate that in writing. You should understand kind of, that path through that heart and through these chambers and so on. So atrium, ventricle, here's how I always remember. The atrium is on top, A comes before V, but I also think the ventricle chamber on the bottom is shaped like a V. So I think it's pretty, to me, it's just kind of obvious that's atrium, ventricle, and you can see the valve that separates that. This is the tricuspid valve. It has three little kind of leaflets that open and close, if you will. And then this is the right atrium and ventricle. So the blood comes through from all over the body. It gets pumped. So your veins and arteries are a closed system, if you will. So this gets pumped from your body back into the heart. The heart pumps it out to the lungs. Here's the branch going to one lung. There's the branch going to the other lung. And then we have this reoxygenated blood coming back in. Here's where it comes back in. And it goes atrium, ventricle, and it gets pumped out. And there's three main arteries that go to all the parts of the body. So that's it kind of in a nutshell. Again, these are the steps that pump that blood to and from the heart, and how it gets reoxygenated. That we say the inferior and superior vena cava. So this just kind of goes through those steps. And if I look back here, I can see where this is labeled. So it says from the superior vena cava. You can see that right there. And then it goes, it dumps that blood into the right atrium and the right ventricle. And again, we can see like atrium, ventricle, and then I said it goes out to that pulmonary circuit. So this is just telling you exactly what we already talked about. I'm going to run out of time on my video here, so I know I don't have any more time to just read through this with you. But yeah, into the pulmonary. Remember, pulmonary means lungs. We said that. So this leads to the lungs where the blood becomes oxygenated. And then there's pulmonary veins that bring the blood from the lungs back to the left atrium. So it started in the right atrium. We said superior vena cava, right atrium, or atrium, ventricle, out to the lungs. And then it brings it back to the heart. And that's